Welcome back to The Conservative. Hi there, I'm Mike Lannon, your host, and this is a show coming to you by way of taped. And it's on PEGTV, as you well know, because you're tuning in, and don't click on by because this is going to be a very fast half hour on the conservative view of political, where we are in the country politically. And as we come to this show, we're about to see whether or not the President of the United States is going to be impeached by not impeached, but if he's going to be acquitted from an impeachment coming from the House of Representatives. And that will be on a Wednesday, so by the time you see all of these shows, that will have come to pass. But my prediction is that he will be acquitted because there is absolutely no criminal charge. There's no misdemeanor. There's no bribery. There's no charge that was ever brought from the House. We'll talk about that in one quick minute, but it's very important that we as viewers of these kinds of programs realize that this is a talk show and it's opinionated, okay? And so my opinion leans to the right. It leans to the conservative side of politics. So, you know, I don't believe in big government. I believe in self-reliance. I believe that a person should have the right to be born. I believe a person has a right to die by God's natural methods. Those are the kinds of things I believe in the Constitution of the United States, the way it is written, not the way it is being addressed by people on the left who believe that it should be a living document subject to change as we grow as a nation. No, it should not be, because it is well founded in its principles and beliefs, especially the Judeo-Christian principles. So as we talk about this show today, we're going to start off by saying that it's disappointing to hear that one of the great conservative talk hosts has left the radio for the time being. He's going to fight cancer for a while, and his name, and most people in America know him, Rush Limbaugh, announced that he is facing some problems with the big C, and that can be devastating, but he's going to have to take some time away from his golden microphone. But you have to appreciate people that are willing to step up and give their opinion year after year after year, and because of his opinion giving, we have a pretty strong conservative movement in this country. And I find it very interesting that the conservative talk shows are the ones that last. The ones that are very liberal in nature, their ratings fall off rapidly. You can look at MSNBC right now. You can look at CNN, which has the most abysmal ratings right now. You can look at the way that they approach the truth and approach Americans with that truth, and you can see that their ratings go very quickly into the flush bowl, better known as the toilet. And Rush Limbaugh, on the other side, has multi-millions of people listening to him every day, according to the Nielsen ratings. And that's when they do the radio ratings, they try to see who's being listened to, and he has a huge following. And I suspect, and I have not looked at this, so it could be that I don't know the exact numbers, but I suspect that Rush Limbaugh pulls in more radio audience than any other political talk show host in the nation, including those that are on TV. And I know that number one on television is Hannity. So those are two very conservative people that outrate, and sometimes Hannity on TV outrates the other two networks, which is MSNBC and CNN. There are days that he outrates the two of them combined. So when he has close to 3.8 million people viewing him at night, I think his time is between 8 and 9 or something. I'm not sure what time it is, 9 and 10. But he's got a nighttime show, and he's got more viewers than anywhere else. Now, if he wasn't telling the truth, if he was spinning the yarn somehow, people would be clicking by him and going off to somebody else. And so you look at the other two channels and you see they're clicking out of that channel and going somewhere else. The great thing about the remote is that you can click. You can move yourself. If you don't like what you're hearing or you don't like what you're seeing, you can move on. And that's great about freedom of speech and the current status of our technology. Now, I know that I don't look at a lot of television, okay? I get a tremendous amount of my news and a tremendous amount of my information off the internet. The only thing about the internet is I have to be very discerning about what I'm watching. I've got to make sure that I'm looking at sites that are technically approved both to the right and the left. And you've heard me say before that I never take and look at just one view. I look at I want to know what the left is saying. I want to know what the independents are saying in the middle, and I want to know what the people on the right are saying. My views are more right than middle and more middle than left, but I certainly am not picking up shows that are absolutely disgusting as far as belying other Americans or tearing down America, chewing us up and spitting us out for nails and thinking that that's great radio or great television. Those shows don't make it. You can see that. Or way, way over to the far right. I don't know of any shows that are to the far right, although people on the left will say that Hannity's too far right, but I don't find him to be too far right. I don't find Tucker Carlson and I don't find Laura Ingraham. Those are all Fox News people, but there are other channels out there, certainly Rush Limbaugh. I don't find them too far right. I find them to look at a piece of material, a fact, and then try to break that fact down, try to show you the cause and effect, try to show you the patterns that are involved in that method. They try very often to show you a mental model of what's going on so that you can make a discerning effort at understanding what's going on. And I've said this before, if you don't have any knowledge, you can't move forward to understand anything. And if you don't have any understanding based on the knowledge that you have in front of you, then you certainly aren't going to pick up any wisdom. Biblical principle, okay? Knowledge begets understanding, understanding begets wisdom, wisdom begets more knowledge. And so that cycle continues on, and it goes as far back as Aristotle when he was talking about the equilateral triangle that you've heard me talk about before, where Aristotle used to talk about the spiritual side of things, knowledge, and then he talked about the understanding, which was the intellectual side, and then he talked about the physical side, which was all tied into that, which came part of wisdom. And without a physical self, as Einstein said, a strong physical body, the only reason we have a body, according to Einstein, was to move the brain. It's the only reason that it was necessary. So the brain, the thinking mechanism of the human body has the human body, and if it's not well preserved with physical activity, it dies, and of course then finally the brain dies. But that's what Aristotle said: spiritual side, intellectual side, physical side. And the Judeo-Christian principle, Jesus comes along and talks about heart, mind, and soul. This is the same thing. The heart being the physical side, the soul being the spiritual side, the mind being the intellectual side. So it doesn't go too far away from what Aristotle was saying, and I suspect, and haven't read this, but I suspect that the Pythagorean school, which was long before Aristotle came along, I suspect that the Pythagorean school of mathematics taught the same thing. I'd have to go back and take a real good, strong look at that. Years ago, I had studied the Pythagorean school, because it was unique in that it involved the study of mathematics for both boys and girls, which was unheard of back there in those days. And over history, we repeated our stupidity against mankind and eliminated women from education. And even in this country, we've had to go a long way to bring women to where they should be as far as being able to do the sciences and the mathematics and anything else that they want to do. And for the longest time, we thought that women should stay at home. And I don't know where all that stuff came from, but it had to come from the ancient days of the farm. And people will say it came from the caves, the caveman times, I don't know. But it seems awfully strange that the second half of a couple, the traditional couple of a male and a female, that the second half of that couple is put in a corner. And of course you remember Dirty Dancing when Mr. Swayze looked at the father of, forgot what her name was, but said nobody puts baby in a corner. That was her name, Baby. And nobody should be putting a woman in a corner. Women have the ability to think as well, sometimes even better than men, but equally men and women should be working together. Another biblical principle spoken to by St. Peter. I think it's attributed to St. Peter, but perhaps written by Paul. But in other words, men and women together as a couple, very, very difficult to break apart their action together. And that makes sense in modern times when we talk about the complement. You marry, generally speaking, someone who is your complement. You don't marry the same person that you are. You marry someone that has the abilities to do the things that you can't do, and then you try to be very careful at balancing so that one isn't doing more than the other one. But that's what marriage is a balance with that complement. Okay, so you guys can all go study that. That's lots of psychology and the way modern man and modern women work together. But it doesn't change much from when it was back in Pythagorean's day. It's just over the history of the last 5,000-6,000 years, we've made all kinds of hiccups when it comes time to the treatment of women. And of course, that comes down to also the treatment of the minorities. We've got to start thinking about the way we do that. Now, currently, you hear all kinds of stuff about the whites not treating the blacks, or treating the Asians, or not treating the American Indians or the yellow races the same. There are plenty of times in history where the whites were the oppressed. So we just don't want to talk about the history of the way we are with each other as humans. And perhaps Jesus was right when he said, love the Lord thy God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and your whole soul. There's that triangle again. And love thy neighbor as you would love yourself. Those are the two great commandments given by Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. So those are very important principles that we should all be trying to live by. And obviously, in this day and age, we've got a ton of people that believe that we should listen to not those texts of the great philosophers and of course Jesus in the world of Christianity, the Son of God. We don't listen to that kind of stuff. We say, no, the government knows best. That's a dangerous place to be, because the government is run by men and some women. And the government is hugely mistaken because there's not a large history behind it. The Old Testament, the oldest known text other than the Mahabharata from India, is the oldest known text that we can read that has the principles of life in it, the recipe for living. That is that text, the first 5 books of that text, go back at least 5,000 or 6,000 years, maybe further, because there's obviously some of that text appears to be coming out of the Sumerian culture, which is 8,000 years ago. But that's as far back as we can go in the reading of the text. And I was even saying today how wonderful it would have been to have been able to see what happened in the huge library of Alexandria during Alexander the Great's time. And that library burned to the ground, and all those books went with it. And we don't know if it was sacked and burned or if it was just burned. I mean, we know that during war, for whatever reason, there are men and women that destroy the intellectual side of the triangle. They want to suppress intelligence, and they want to oppress the people that they're conquering, so they take care of the intellectual side. Well, one of the ways to take care of the intellectual side is to burn the books. Hitler did it, Mao did it, and somewhere down there in the ancient times, we know that the Great Library of Alexandria was burned, and the Great Library of Alexandria at that time allegedly contained all of the books of the world at that time. So that would have been a great library to have been able to get our hands on and be able to read and see the kinds of things that were written. Now we have other ancient books, we can't read them. We have other ancient texts written on stone that we can't read. We don't know what they say because we've never found a Rosetta Stone. We've never found a stone that took us from the Sumerian languages back into the other languages where some of these stories may have been created. Because the oral traditions, and we don't know exactly where they started, we summarize that they started in a certain place and people began to write them down, but those stories could have come from a very long, long time ago. It's like looking at the Piri Reis map. Piri Reis map, P-R-I-I, and then capital R-E-I-S, it's capital P-I-R-I, space, capital R-E-I-S. The Piri Reis map is an ancient map based on ancient maps. We don't have the maps that it was based on, but we do know that the Piri Reis map has Antarctica, for instance, well above where it's positioned on the Earth today. And that's a huge piece of science that a professor from Keene State College and Einstein studied together on how our Antarctica shifted from that position on the map. And the map is pretty accurate, so we figure that Antarctica was where the Piri Reis map says it was, and all of a sudden there was a big shift and Antarctica went south to where it's positioned on the Earth today. How that happened, we don't know. There's a theory that Einstein and Hapgood placed out, and that was that it would be like looking at an orange cover. All of the faculties of the Earth on the inside, you could read that science, but then the cover itself moved, the whole cover of the Earth, not just the plate, but the whole cover at one time moved and shifted everything from that part of the world down underneath to the south, and that would have been other pieces shifted. Well, if that had happened, talk about the 40 days and 40 nights of great flood. That would certainly be a possibility. So we don't know what happens years and years and years ago. We speculate and we make theory about it, but we don't really know. So when we're talking about the ancients and how all of this came up through and how we repeat ourselves as history, we just don't study it and then learn from it. And we're making the same mistakes that we made 75 years ago. Anti-Semitism, for instance, in the United States, according to the United States government, is on its rise. Well, 75 years ago was on its rise in Hitler's Germany. And you know what they did there. Millions of Jewish people were annihilated. They were sacrificed in ovens and tortured and raped and maimed and experimented on, medical experiments. There were all kinds of disgusting things done to a certain population. Now, that was the major number of people that were tortured and destroyed during Hitler's time, but there's others that were in that group. There were Christians that were killed. There were intellectuals that were killed. And along comes Stalin right after the war, and he immediately started destroying the intellectuals. It wasn't just the Jews, it was the intellectuals. Well, why would you kill the intellectuals? Well, they're the ones who are the thinkers. They're the ones who dare to perhaps stand up and say, you know, we ought to have freedom of speech. We ought to have freedom of religion. We ought to perhaps have freedom of the press. We ought to have the right to assemble. We ought to have the right to grieve. Well, those are the first 5 principles of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. You can imagine why the Founding Fathers, who were intellectuals, decided that these were important principles and that we should not, under any circumstances, allow them to go anywhere. And Stalin believed just the opposite. He believed that religion, based on the text written by Lenin and Marx, that religion was an opiate of mankind. It was used to suppress people. Well, they obviously didn't understand religion and what it's all about, especially Judeo-Christian religion. And I hear people always say, well, that's an oppressive religion. You have to obey the rules. Well, yeah, the 10 Commandments came from as far back as we can read. Okay, so they're pretty good tenets, pretty good recipes to live by. But Stalin believed, no, we're going to have the rules of the state in place, and those that want to believe in thou shalt not kill, well, we'll get rid of them because we don't want anybody preaching that kind of stuff. So even in the Soviet Union today, much of religion is underground and not out in the open, other than the state religion, which is totally controlled by the state, and the sermons and the homilies and everything that's read at a church service, including the above ground Christian churches, it's state run. Now the underground church, I suspect, is totally underground and preaching the gospel, or even in the Quran, if there's the Muslims of the Soviet Union, the ancient Soviet Union, which is Russia today, minus its sub World War II states, which are all kind of independent. But I know that in China, for instance, the Muslim Uyghurs have been trying for years now to practice, and they're being suppressed. We don't talk about it in this country, but if you go out to the world press and see what they're doing. Uyghurs, which are Muslims in, I think, the northwest corner of China, they're disappearing. They're there one night and gone the next, and they're not being found. So I suspect that they're either being put into Chinese prison camps, torture work camps, and or they're being annihilated. So that's exactly what they did in Hitler's day. That's exactly what they did in Stalin's day. Now, Hitler took care of about 1.5 million people, and Stalin about 3.5. Mao was closer to 8 or 9 million. They're huge numbers of people, and all of these people were trying to promote government states. And people in America that are yelling and screaming about, as this show is being taped, that wonderful politician by the name of Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, took his honeymoon in the old Soviet Union and really believed in the Communist Manifesto, and to this day will tell you that he believes that he's a social democrat. Well, this is not a social democratic country. This is a republic. So Bernie gets away with people that are not reading about history. They don't listen to what he's actually proposing, but in the long haul of things, he's going to have to, if he should ever get elected, he's going to have to eliminate the intellectuals if he plans to establish a government state. And that's exactly what socialism is. Socialism is the establishment of a government state. We do not want in this country a government state, and that's why you hear the conservatives yelling and screaming, and especially President Trump over the last year has expressed many times the fact that we will never be a socialistic nation. And yet, I feel he's not looking at the polls, because the poll numbers indicate that there are more and more people that are interested in converting America to a socialistic state. These people, they're mushheads. They have no idea about the history of this country. They're not looking at what this country is all about. And shame on all of us that are watching this TV show, and shame on me for not standing on the street corners and yelling and screaming to people about, don't let this happen. You are in the greatest country that was ever placed by God on this earth. And we have the opportunity to lose it. We have that opportunity every single generation. So that's basically every 12 years, because that's when we have, every 12 years, we have high school graduates. And the high school graduates are the ones that are going to carry on the value structure of this nation. And if they're being taught nothing about civics, nothing about the importance of the United States government and its founding and the founding fathers' dreams of a constitutional republic, then they have no clue when they're double that high school education, they're 24, 25, 26, whether they've been to college or not. They've been to college, they've been really brainwashed with the mush, and they're not making the discerning thinking necessary to keep the country safe from a government state. Now, the government state doesn't have to be socialism. It could be just pure government, totally controlling your lives from A to Z. It could be a socialistic state, which is a control of the economic portion of the economy that they wish to control, which would be healthcare in all likelihood, the education in all likelihood, religious liberties in all likelihood, which would oppress the masses and force them out of the churches, which pretty much, if you look carefully, has been sold to the American public. We have fewer and fewer people going to church in this country. We'll pay a price for that. And we're paying a price right now in the educational system. It's very interesting to see that nationally we are now 37th. 10 years ago we were at the 30%, at the 30 mark. But we're a 37th nation in the world in education right now. There was a time when we were in the top 5. Now what's happened? Well, kids can't read, can't write, can't do arithmetic anymore. Now that's not all children. You know there's children that can do this. But we're talking about the norm, the average kid coming out of high school. I find it very interesting that in my lifetime, the newspapers, which are folding now, they can't get them to read. At one time, the newspaper was written for an 8th grade level education. Now we can't get anybody to read them because they're having to water the writing down to approximately the 4th grade level. That's a loss of 4 points, and down we go. So if you're able to read a newspaper and all you can do is read it at the 4th grade level, you aren't able to read very much information. Your ability to read is very, very low. And we know that a lot of people cannot do simple math. I can tell you where I was just recently. I gave a clerk $10 at a fast food restaurant. They gave me $20 back. How can you do that? You know, the register is sitting right there telling them exactly how much change to get back. So I didn't realize what had happened until I got home that night and realized that I had more money in my pocket than I left that day with. Okay, so I knew where I'd gone to eat, and I went back in and I asked the manager, check your till, see if you're money short. He came out, yeah, we're $20 short. I said, I got it in my pocket. He couldn't believe it, you know. And I asked him, whatever you do, just give this person more training, but don't fire them. I don't know what they did, but it's like, wow, I just can't believe that people do that. Well, I went to the same restaurant almost a month later, and I got the same thing happen, less money. I think I gave them $5, and I got something like $8 back. Not the same clerk, another clerk, a new clerk. Well, what are they doing for training? What's going on here? But it would seem to me that when the cash register tells someone exactly how much to give in change, someone can count out the money. Why would you give me back $5 and then $3 when the item that I was paying for was like $4.50? I didn't get it, but I caught that one right there because I'm more cognizant, you know. I'm now cognitively engaged when I'm at the register, making sure that they are getting what they're supposed to get for money and getting it back. And my wife has fun doing that all the time. Sometimes she'll give someone, it'll be something like $20.55, or it'll be like $17.55. She'll put the $20 bill on the table and the 55 cents, and they come back with the $3.55. It's like the 55, you just subtract the 17 from the 20, you get $3, and 55 cents is the change that's going forward, supposed to go in the till. Now that doesn't happen as often as it used to, but it comes back down to the heart of, can people actually do arithmetic? So these are very, very important things. We started the show off talking about the acquittal will be before we come back in 2 weeks to retape the next show. But I just wanted to say quickly that it's so unfair what they're doing down there in Washington right now, so swampy, because you can look back at the last 4 presidents, which were both Democrat and Republican, and every single one of those presidents held money back and away from other countries for, quote, quid pro quo reasons. And there's nothing wrong with that quid pro quo if it's tied, as Derkowitz was saying the other day, if it's tied to the national interest. You're spending billions of dollars with these countries. And if those countries aren't willing to spend that dollar wisely, and they're going to spend that dollar corruptly, in other words, they're going to take $1 billion and half of that billion or the entire billion goes into their retirement package for that particular dictator or that particular organization that's running the country, that's not what Americans think that their money should be being paid for. And so when Donald Trump asked the Ukrainian president to look carefully at the corruption, he never once said, I want you to look at the Bidens. He was talking to the Ukrainian, the newly elected Ukrainian president and saying, look, it looks to me like you're hanging around with the same corrupt politicians that the last president was hanging around. If you read back through all the literature that's come out, that's what he was talking about. He didn't appreciate the fact that this brand new president that ran on draining the Ukrainian swamp from its corruption was now aligning himself with the same individuals that were corrupt. That would concern me if I were a businessman. I wouldn't want my money going to a company that was going to take and use the money inappropriately. That's what presidents of the United States are supposed to do. Well, he didn't get charged or anything like that. There was no charge for a quid pro quo. It was called an abuse of power. Well, nobody charged Obama for an abuse of power when he sent all those billions of dollars on pallets and cash and other currencies to Iran. Nobody charged him with a national disgrace when he put together that nuclear bomb deal from Iran. Nobody charged him for any of those kinds of things. The corruption that occurred in the Clinton administration, not the Monica Lewinsky thing. There were other pieces of corruption that he should have been impeached on. The one where he was giving away secrets to China, the one where the Clintons gave away 20% of our uranium field here in America, so that uranium used to build atom bombs. Those are the kinds of things. So believe it or not, the half hour has come to an end. I can't believe how fast these half hours go. Didn't cover half of what I wanted to, but thanks a lot for watching. See you next time. Bye now.